August 9th, 378 AD. The plains outside Adrianople, modern-day Turkey. Emperor Valens sits on his white horse, watching his army of 15,000 men form up in the brutal afternoon heat. They've been marching for 6 hours without water. The Gothic forces are right there, just across the valley, and Valens makes a decision. He orders the attack. What happens in the next 6 hours will haunt military historians for the next 1,600 years. Because this isn't just a battle. This is the moment the greatest military power on earth crosses the point of no return. By sunset, 2/3 of the Roman army will be dead. The emperor's body will never be found. And Rome, the empire that conquered the known world, just entered a death spiral it will never escape. But here's what makes this terrifying. Nobody, in that moment, knew. Valens didn't know he was watching the beginning of the end. His soldiers didn't know they were fighting Rome's last real battle. To them, it was just another day, another enemy, another fight. That's how military collapse works. It doesn't announce itself. It follows a pattern, a sequence of indicators that appears before every major imperial downfall in recorded history. And by the time everyone agrees the collapse is happening, it's already over. This isn't a story about one battle. This is about the pattern. Military historians have observed it for 2,000 years, not as some formal academic model with 8 neat stages, but as recurring indicators that show up in sequence before empires bleed out. Rome took 250 years to fall after Adrianople. Napoleon's empire collapsed in 36 months. Germany, in World War I, went from dominant power to surrender in 10 months. The pattern accelerates with modern warfare, and that's why some defense analysts are nervous right now. Because when you look at Russia's current situation in 2025, when you examine the statistics coming out of credible think tanks like the Institute for the Study of War, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, you start seeing indicators that historians recognize. The same indicators that appeared before Germany's 1918 collapse. Not predictions, pattern recognition, and the pattern has been right for 2 millennia. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what those indicators are. You'll see how they played out across 4 major case studies. The fall of Rome from 235 to 476 AD. Napoleon's collapse from 1812 to 1815. Germany's World War I disintegration from 1916 to 1918. And Germany's World War II defeat from 1942 to 1945. 4 empires, 4 collapses, same sequence of events. And then we're going to look at the data coming out of Ukraine and ask an uncomfortable question. Is it happening again? Before we dive into these forgotten chapters of military history, if you're fascinated by the patterns that shape warfare and empire, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support keeps these deep analyses coming. And comment below with where you're watching from. I find it incredible that we're examining these ancient patterns together from different corners of the world, connected by our shared need to understand how power dies. Here's what you need to understand about military collapse. It's not one catastrophic defeat. It's a cascade, a series of failures that build on each other until the entire system breaks. The pattern starts with overextension, fighting on too many fronts with supply lines stretched beyond sustainability. Then comes the catastrophic defeat, the turning point battle, where offensive capability is permanently broken. After that, desperate mobilization, calling up anyone who can hold a weapon, draining the last reserves. Then, declining quality, when the replacements show up undertrained, under-equipped, and demoralized. Next, the failed gamble, the last desperate offensive that exhausts remaining strength without achieving strategic objectives. And finally, internal collapse, mutinies, mass surrenders, or political revolution. 6 indicators. They appear in sequence. And once you've seen all 6, the countdown to defeat can be measured in months, sometimes weeks. The terrifying thing? Empires in collapse rarely recognize they're dying until it's too late. They make rational decisions with incomplete information. They fight harder, mobilize deeper, launch bigger offensives, all while accelerating their own destruction. Rome kept recruiting barbarian mercenaries to solve its manpower crisis, never realizing those mercenaries would eventually destroy the empire from within. Napoleon rebuilt his army after Russia, won tactical victories in 1813, and still lost the war because he couldn't see he'd already crossed the point of no return. Germany's generals in 1918 believed their spring offensive was working right up until the moment their army started surrendering en masse. That's the pattern's cruelest lesson. By the time you realize you're in it, you're already dead. You just haven't stopped moving yet. So let's start where all roads lead. Rome, the empire that defined Western civilization, the military machine that conquered everything from Britain to Mesopotamia. Watch how 250 years of slow bleeding follows the exact same indicators we're going to see compressed into months and years in later examples. Because if you want to understand how modern militaries collapse, you have to understand how the Romans invented the playbook. The year 235 AD, Emperor Severus Alexander is murdered by his own troops on the Rhine frontier. He's 26 years old. The soldiers are angry about unpaid wages, angry about endless wars on the German border, angry enough to kill their commander-in-chief and declare their general the new emperor. This kicks off what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, and it's where Rome's death spiral truly begins. Over the next 49 years, 26 different men will claim the throne. Most will die violently. Some will rule for months. One emperor, Gordian I, lasts exactly 22 days before committing suicide. The empire isn't just politically unstable, it's militarily overextended to the breaking point. Picture the strategic nightmare. Rome has to defend 5,000 miles of frontier, from Hadrian's Wall in Britain to the deserts of Syria. The legions are spread thin, and every border is under pressure. Germans are raiding across the Rhine. Persians are pushing from the east. By 268 AD, the empire literally splits into 3 competing states. The Gallic Empire controls Gaul, Britain, and Spain. The Palmyrene Empire takes Syria and Egypt. Rome itself controls just Italy and the Balkans. It's not an empire anymore. It's 3 pieces pretending to be one. And then comes the first major permanent territorial loss that really matters. In 271 AD, Emperor Aurelian makes a decision that would have been unthinkable a century earlier. He abandons Dacia, the province north of the Danube that Emperor Trajan had conquered in 106 AD. Rome is retreating, giving up land, admitting it can no longer hold what it once conquered. That's indicator 1, overextension to the point of territorial abandonment. But Rome isn't dead yet. Enter Diocletian in 284 AD. And this is where the pattern gets interesting. Diocletian implements massive reforms that, on paper, save the empire. He splits imperial administration between East and West. He creates the tetrarchy system with 4 co-emperors. He reorganizes the entire military structure, creating border troops called limitanae and mobile field armies called comitatenses. He restores army strength to roughly 389,000 men, plus 45,000 inches the naval fleets. For a moment, it looks like Rome has stabilized. The bleeding has stopped. But here's what you need to remember. And this is crucial, because you're going to see this exact pattern again in 1813 France. Diocletian's reforms that saved Rome actually accelerated its death. How? The cost. To pay for this massive new military structure, taxes skyrocket. The currency is debased, meaning coins have less and less actual silver and gold. The economy contracts. Population declines because people literally can't afford to have children under the tax burden. Rome saved itself by draining its last reserves. It's a temporary stabilization that makes the final collapse inevitable. Now we come to the catastrophic turning point. Remember that opening scene? Adrianople, August 9, 378 AD. Let me give you the full context of what happened that day. The Goths, fleeing from the Huns, had been admitted across the Danube River 2 years earlier as refugees. Rome needed soldiers, the Goths needed safety. It seemed like a win-win, except Roman officials brutally mistreated them. They forced Gothic families to trade their children into slavery for dog meat. Yes, dog meat. The Romans were literally selling dogs to starving refugees for their kids. This created a dangerous, angry enemy within Roman borders. Emperor Valens, arrogant and impatient, decided to attack before his reinforcements arrived from the west. His army of 15,000 to 30,000 men marched all morning in August heat with no water, then formed up to face Gothic cavalry and infantry under a warlord named Fritigern. The battle was a massacre. The Gothic cavalry hit the Roman flanks. The infantry pressed from the front. The Roman formations collapsed into a panicked mob. Soldiers were trampled, suffocated, or cut down trying to run. By the end of the day, 2/3 of the Roman army was dead. That's 10,000 to 20,000 men, gone. Emperor Valens was killed. His body never recovered. Experienced officers and administrators, the institutional memory of Roman military competence, were wiped out. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus, who lived through this period, wrote that the annals record no such massacre except the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, over 500 years earlier. This is Rome's worst military disaster in half a millennium, and unlike Cannae, Rome never recovers from Adrianople. The empire permanently loses offensive capability. After 378 AD, Rome is only playing defense, and defense doesn't win wars. It just delays the inevitable. So, what does Rome do? It doubles down on the exact policy that created the crisis. Rome needs soldiers, so it recruits more foreigners. By 390 AD, just 12 years after Adrianople, approximately 25% of the Western Roman army are barbarian foederati, mercenaries, and allied troops who aren't Roman citizens. In the Eastern army, it's 33%. The Romans even start using the Latin word barbarus, which means barbarian, interchangeably with soldier. Think about that. The word for foreigner becomes synonymous with military professional. The army meant to defend Roman civilization is increasingly composed of people who have no cultural investment in that civilization. This is indicator 4, dependency on foreign auxiliaries, because the native population can't or won't fill the ranks anymore. The final century is just a slow-motion collapse punctuated by humiliations. First sack of Rome, August 24 to 27, 410 AD. Alaric and his Visigoths capture the Eternal City for the first time in over 800 years. They loot 12 tons of gold and 13 tons of silver. Second sack of Rome, June 2 to 16, 455 AD. The Vandals under King Genseric spend 2 weeks systematically stripping the city, including half the bronze roof tiles from the Temple of Jupiter. And then, the final insult. September 4, 476 AD. The last Western emperor, a teenager named Romulus Augustulus, is deposed by Odoacer, a Germanic mercenary general leading foederati troops. Those barbarian soldiers Rome had recruited to save itself, they just demanded settlement rights in Italy. When the emperor's father refused, they revolted. Rome wasn't conquered from outside. It was destroyed from within by its own mercenary army. From the crisis of the 3rd century to the fall, 241 years, 6 indicators, all present. Overextension, catastrophic defeat, desperate reforms, draining reserves, dependency on foreigners, territorial losses, and internal collapse. The pattern is complete. But watch what happens when Napoleon experiences this same sequence in less than 3 years. The 24th of June, 1812. The Grande Armée crosses the Niemen River into Russia. This is the largest military force ever assembled in European history, 612,000 men. That's more than twice the size of any army Napoleon has ever commanded. He has 200,000 horses pulling artillery and supply wagons. He has 1,372 guns. On paper, it's an unstoppable war machine. But here's the first warning sign. Less than half of this massive army is actually French. Only 302,000 are Frenchmen. The rest, Poles, Lithuanians, Germans, Dutch, Swiss, Italians, Spanish. Napoleon is already at Rome's 390 AD problem. He's dependent on foreign troops to fill his ranks because France itself is bled dry after 20 years of constant warfare. The pattern is already in motion. He just doesn't see it yet. The Russian campaign is a masterclass in overextension. Napoleon's supply lines stretch over 1,000 miles from France. His logistics officers are screaming that the army can't be fed this far from base. But Napoleon believes speed and shock will win before supplies matter. He's chasing the Russian army deeper and deeper into the endless steppe, and the Russians keep retreating, burning everything behind them. By the time Napoleon reaches Smolensk in mid-August, typhus is ripping through his army. Men are dying of disease faster than combat, but he pushes on. The 7th of September, 1812. The Battle of Borodino. This is Napoleon's chance for the decisive engagement that ends the war. 250,000 men collide on a field 7 miles wide. The fighting is apocalyptic. Combined casualties reach 70,000 to 75,000 inches a single day. That's nearly 30% of everyone who fought. Between 49 and 50 French generals are killed or wounded. Napoleon has a chance to commit his elite Imperial Guard, his 20,000 fresh troops, and potentially shatter the Russian line. He refuses. He's 1,000 miles from Paris. He can't afford to lose his last reserve. So the battle ends in a bloody stalemate, and the Russian army limps away to fight another day. This is the moment Napoleon loses the war, but he doesn't know it yet. He thinks he won because the Russians retreated. Napoleon enters Moscow on September 14 with only 95,000 to 100,000 exhausted men. He's lost 500,000 soldiers just getting there. The city is empty, and then the Russians burn it. 3/4 of Moscow goes up in flames. No shelter, no supplies, no surrender. Tsar Alexander I refuses to negotiate. Napoleon sits in the smoking ruins for 5 weeks, waiting for a peace offer that never comes. Finally, on October 19, he accepts reality. He orders the retreat. He leaves with 110,000 men. Winter is coming. The retreat becomes one of history's greatest military catastrophes. Temperatures plunge to -30 to -38 degrees Celsius. Men freeze to death in their sleep. Horses drop dead mid-stride. The army fragments into a desperate mob of starving, frostbitten refugees. By the time Napoleon reaches Smolensk on November 9, only 50,000 effective soldiers remain. Then comes the Berezina River crossing, November 26 to 29. This is where the nightmare peaks. Russian armies are converging from 3 directions, totaling over 130,000 troops. Napoleon has to cross a freezing river while under attack. His engineers build 2 pontoon bridges in water so cold that 40 out of 400 Dutch engineers die of hypothermia during construction. The crossing costs 20,000 to 30,000 French combatants killed, plus 30,000 civilians and camp followers. Berezina enters the French language as a synonym for total disaster. The final statistics are staggering. Of 612,000 men who cross the Niemen River in June, only 112,000 make it back to the frontier in December. Some sources say only 22,000 to 27,000 are actually fit for combat. France loses approximately 500,000 men in 6 months. But here's the detail that destroys Napoleon's future. 180,000 horses lost. Those aren't just transportation. Those are veteran cavalry mounts. Trained war horses that take years to replace. Remember this number. It's about to cost Napoleon everything in 1813. Now watch the pattern accelerate. Napoleon returns to Paris and performs a miracle of mobilization. He rebuilds his army from 30,000 survivors to 400,000 men in just 4 months. It looks impressive until you examine the details. These troops are teenagers, conscripts so young they're nicknamed Marie Louises after the Empress. They have minimal training, and critically, Napoleon can't replace his cavalry. He has infantry, he has artillery, but he doesn't have the horses or the trained riders to exploit victories. This means he can win tactical battles, but can't turn them into strategic wins. He can't pursue, he can't encircle, he can't deliver the knockout blow. Spring 1813. Napoleon wins at Lutzen in May, 20,000 French casualties. He wins at Bautzen a few weeks later, another 20,000 casualties. In both battles, his losses are twice what the Allies suffer, and after each victory, The enemy army escapes because Napoleon has no cavalry to chase them down. He's winning himself to death, bleeding out victories he can't afford. This is the exact problem Rome had after Adrianople. Tactical capability, but no strategic follow-through. October 16 to 19, 1813. The Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of Nations. This is the largest battle in European history before World War I. 560,000 total combatants. Napoleon's 180,000 to 191,000 troops faced 320,000 to 394,000 coalition forces. For 4 days, the armies batter each other in the streets of Leipzig, and then the pattern completes. On the third day, Saxon troops, supposedly Napoleon's allies, defect in the middle of the battle. They turn their guns on the French. This is Rome's Foederati moment, happening in real time. On the fourth day, the bridge across the Ulster River is blown prematurely, trapping 30,000 French soldiers on the wrong side. They surrender en masse. By the end, Napoleon has lost 68,000 men and retreats with a shattered army. The 1813 campaign costs him 400,000 to 500,000 troops total. France is bled white. The 1814 campaign is Napoleon's last gasp. He's reduced to 70,000 men, only 30,000 properly organized, facing invasion from multiple directions. He fights brilliantly, winning a series of victories during the 6 Days campaign in February. But it doesn't matter. The strategic situation is hopeless. On April 5, Marshal Marmont, one of Napoleon's oldest friends, defects to the enemy. On April 6, the other marshals mutiny at Fontainebleau, refusing to fight anymore. Napoleon abdicates. From master of Europe to exile on Elba, 36 months. He tries one more time. The 100 Days. Waterloo. The 18th of June, 1815. 74,500 French troops against Wellington's 68,000 plus Prussian reinforcements. The Imperial Guard makes a final attack at 7 p.m. It's repulsed. The army breaks. Napoleon loses 24,000 to 40,000 men plus 15,000 deserters in a single afternoon. He abdicates again on June 22. Dies in exile on Street Helena on the 5th of May, 1821. Rome took 250 years to experience the full collapse pattern. Napoleon compressed it into 3 years. Same sequence. Overextension, catastrophic defeat, desperate mobilization, quality degradation, failed gambles, collapse. But watch what happens when industrial warfare enters the equation. Germany is about to speedrun this pattern in 10 months. The 21st of February 1916, Verdun, France. German Chief of Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, has a theory. He believes the key to winning World War I isn't capturing territory, it's killing Frenchmen. He picks Verdun, a fortress city with massive symbolic importance to French national pride, and launches an offensive designed to bleed France white. His logic is simple and brutal. The French will defend Verdun at any cost. We'll set up a meat grinder and let them feed themselves into our artillery. It's not about taking the city. It's about making France run out of men first. This is industrial warfare's new reality. Victory doesn't go to whoever maneuvers better. It goes to whoever can afford to bleed longer. The Battle of Verdun lasts 302 days. By the time it ends on December 18, combined casualties reach approximately 700,000 men. French losses are 377,000 to 400,000. German losses are 330,000 to 350,000. Falkenhayn's plan to bleed France white instead bleeds both armies. The offensive fails to break French morale. Falkenhayn is replaced in August 1916. Germany gains essentially nothing. But the damage to German combat effectiveness is catastrophic. This is attritional exhaustion, the modern version of Rome's endless frontier wars or Napoleon's Spanish ulcer. You're not losing battles. You're just grinding your army into dust one day at a time. Then comes the Somme. July 1 to the 18th of November 1916. While Verdun is still raging, the British and French launch their own offensive further north. German casualties reach 450,000 to 650,000. Crown Prince Ruprecht of Bavaria, commanding German forces in the sector, writes in his diary a sentence that should have ended the war right there. What remained of the old first-class peace-trained German infantry had been expended on the battlefield. Read that again. The professional German army, the trained soldiers who conquered Belgium and nearly took Paris in 1914, is gone. Killed at Verdun and the Somme. What's left are replacements. Conscripts with minimal training. The quality degradation has begun. But Germany doesn't surrender. Instead, in spring 1918, they launched their last gamble. The Kaiserschlacht, the Kaiser's battle. 50 divisions freed up from the Eastern Front after Russia's collapse give Germany temporary numerical superiority on the Western Front. This is their chance. One massive offensive to break through Allied lines before American troops arrive in overwhelming numbers. The 21st of March 1918. The attack begins with the most intense artillery bombardment in human history up to that point. Over 1,100,000 shells fired in 5 hours onto a 150 square mile target area. The earth doesn't just shake, it liquefies. Elite German stormtrooper units, using new infiltration tactics, achieve unprecedented gains. They advance 40 miles in some sectors, the deepest penetration since trench warfare began in 1914. For a moment, it looks like Germany is winning. But here's what Ludendorff, the German commander, doesn't account for. The cost? By April 10, German casualties reach 300,000 men, and those losses are concentrated in the stormtrooper units. The best soldiers Germany has left. The advance outpaces German supply lines and artillery support. The troops who reach the furthest points are exhausted, starving, and leaderless. They stop to loot Allied supply depots, finding more food and equipment than they've seen in years. The offensive, as military historians put it, peters out. Germany doesn't get pushed back. They just run out of strength. They advance 40 miles, lose 300,000 of their best men, and gain nothing strategically valuable. The last gamble has failed. The 8th of August 1918, the Battle of Amiens. General Ludendorff will later call this the Black Day of the German Army in the history of this war. Allied forces, now equipped with 500 tanks and supported by 2,000 aircraft, punch a 15-mile gap in German lines. But the thing that breaks Ludendorff's mind isn't the tanks or the planes. It's what the German soldiers do. 30,000 men surrender. Not after being surrounded. Not after running out of ammunition. They just quit. They see the tanks coming and put their hands up. This is unprecedented. Mass surrender indicates total morale collapse. Remember Rome's foederati? Remember the Saxons defecting at Leipzig? This is the industrial warfare version. Your own troops stop fighting because they've lost faith in victory. Kaiser Wilhelm II looks at the casualty reports from Amiens and declares, "We have reached the limits of our capacity." He's admitting what military historians can see in the data. Germany can't replace these losses anymore. The reserves are gone. What follows is the 100 Days Offensive, August 8 to the 11th of November 1918. Allied forces attack along the entire Western Front. German casualties over these 3 months reach 1,172,075 men. But here's the statistic that tells you everything. From mid-July to war's end, approximately 340,000 German soldiers surrender. British General Rawlinson observes that the Hindenburg Line would have been impregnable if it had been defended by the German army of 2 years earlier. Translation: the men are still there, end of quote, but the will is gone. They're not fighting. They're waiting for it to end. And then comes the internal collapse. The 29th of October, 1918. The German Naval High Command orders the fleet to sail out for one final suicide battle against the British Royal Navy. The sailors at Wilhelmshaven refuse. They call it a death voyage. The mutiny spreads. By November 3, full revolt erupts at Kiel. Workers' and soldiers' councils form, demanding an end to the war. The revolution spreads to Hamburg, Bremen, and Munich. The military hasn't just been defeated externally. It's collapsing from within. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicates on November 9. The armistice is signed the 11th of November 1918 at 11 a.m. From the spring offensive in March to surrender in November. 7 months. The pattern that took Napoleon 36 months compressed into less than a year. Attrition, failed gamble, mass surrenders, internal collapse. Germany mobilized approximately 13 million men during the war. Total casualties: roughly 1.6 to 2.4 million dead, 4.2 million wounded, approximately 1 million prisoners or missing. That's 54.6% of everyone they mobilized, killed, wounded, or captured. The pattern is now undeniable. Same sequence across 3 empires spanning 1,600 years. But here's what should terrify you. Germany is going to do this again. Same country, same pattern. Only this time, it happens even faster. And the next iteration is going to give us the clearest blueprint for recognizing collapse in real time. Because in World War II, we have detailed records of every stage. The 22nd of June, 1941, Operation Barbarossa. Germany invades the Soviet Union with 3.8 million troops along a 2,900-kilometer front. This is the largest military operation in human history. Hitler expects victory in 6 weeks. The plan is based on a simple assumption: kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will collapse. It's the same arrogance Napoleon had in 1812. The same belief that speed and shock will win before logistics matter. And just like Napoleon, the Germans are about to learn that Russia doesn't play by European rules. The initial advance is stunning. German panzer divisions cut through Soviet defenses like they're not even there. By December, German forward units reach within 15 miles of Moscow. They can see the Kremlin spires through their binoculars. Victory seems inevitable, except the casualties. By late December 1941, German losses reach 830,000 men. That's more than 20% of the invasion force dead, wounded, or missing in 6 months. And then, winter hits. Temperatures drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius. German troops are still wearing summer uniforms because the war was supposed to be over by now. Vehicles won't start. Weapons jam. Men freeze to death in their foxholes. The Soviets counterattack with 500,000 fresh Siberian troops equipped for winter warfare. They push the Germans back 155 to 200 miles from Moscow. The myth of invincibility is shattered. But Hitler doesn't pull back. He doubles down. Summer 1942. The focus shifts to Stalingrad. This industrial city on the Volga River becomes the site of the most brutal urban combat in military history. Over 4 million combatants fight in a hellscape of rubble, cellars, and ruins. The battle lasts from the 23rd of August 1942 to the 2nd of February 1943. When it ends, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrenders with 91,000 survivors out of a 300,000-man 6th Army that got encircled. This is the largest German military defeat in history up to this point. Historian David Glantz writes, "The Germans never fully recovered from it. This is Germany's Adrianople. This is their Berezina, the catastrophic turning point where offensive capability is permanently broken." July 5 to the 23rd of August 1943. The Battle of Kursk. This is history's largest tank battle. The last time Germany can mass enough armor for a major offensive in the East. Over 3 million men and 8,000 tanks collide in a week-long apocalypse of steel. Germany loses approximately 2,900 tanks. They gain nothing. After Kursk, Germany is permanently on the defensive on the Eastern Front. They'll never launch another major offensive in Russia. Just like Rome after Adrianople. Just like Napoleon after the 1813 campaign. The capacity for strategic initiative is gone. Now, here's the callback you need to remember. After Napoleon's 1812 campaign, he rebuilt his army but couldn't replace his cavalry. That meant he could win tactical battles in 1813, but couldn't turn them into strategic victories because he had no pursuit capability. Germany in 1944 has the exact same problem, but with tanks instead of horses. They can defend. They can conduct local counterattacks. But they don't have the armored reserves to exploit breakthroughs or encircle enemy armies the way they did in 1940 and 1941. The blitzkrieg machine is broken. What's left is a slow, grinding retreat. The 16th of December 1944, Hitler launches his final offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. This is Germany's Kaiserschlacht moment, their desperate last gamble in the West. Hitler commits over 200,000 troops and nearly 1,000 tanks, attacking through the Ardennes forest with the goal of reaching the port of Antwerp and splitting the Allied armies. The initial surprise is total. American forces are caught completely off guard. The Germans advance 50 miles. For 5 days, it looks like Hitler's gamble might actually work. But then the same thing happens that happened in 1918. The offensive runs out of fuel, literally and figuratively. German tanks stop 4 miles from the Meuse River because they're out of gasoline. American reinforcements arrive. The weather clears, allowing Allied air power to devastate German columns. By the 25th of January 1945, the Bulge is eliminated. German casualties: 80,000 to 100,000 men. These are irreplaceable losses. Hitler has exhausted his strategic reserves on an offensive that gained nothing permanent. Just like the Spring Offensive in 1918. Just like Napoleon's 1815 campaign, the pattern repeats with machine-like precision. What follows is total collapse. By April 1945, Germany is calling up the Volkssturm, literally, people's storm. Every able-bodied man, between 16 and 60, grandfathers and children, armed with bolt-action rifles from World War I and Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons, are expected to stop Soviet tank armies. It's not a military force, it's mass human sacrifice. House-to-house fighting reduces the capital to rubble. Adolf Hitler commits suicide in his bunker on the 30th of April 1945. Germany surrenders on May 7 and 8, 1945. Total German World War II military deaths, approximately 5.3 million. 80% occurred on the Eastern Front. From Kursk in July 1943 to Berlin in May 1945, less than 2 years. The pattern that took Rome 250 years, Napoleon 36 months, and World War I Germany 10 months, has now been compressed to under 24 months. Same sequence. Overextension into Russia, catastrophic defeat, desperate mobilization, quality degradation, failed gamble, collapse. 4 case studies, 4 different centuries, same pattern. We're not talking about some mystical, historical force. We're talking about observable indicators that appear when militaries outrun their logistics, suffer irreplaceable losses, and exhaust their reserves with failed offensives. The pattern doesn't care about ideology. It doesn't care about technology. It doesn't care if you're riding horses or driving tanks. It just repeats. And that brings us to the uncomfortable question, the one you've been waiting for since the beginning of this video. Is it happening again? Let's look at the data coming out of Ukraine in 2024 and 2025. And I want to be very clear before we start. I'm not making predictions. I'm not claiming Russia is doomed. I'm examining indicators that credible defense think tanks are documenting and asking whether they match the historical patterns we've just studied. Because if they do, we need to understand what comes next. Let me start with the disclaimer I promised. There is no formal 8-stage military collapse model being applied to Russia by serious defense analysts. That concept is viral social media content, not peer-reviewed scholarship. What does exist is data. Reports from credible think tanks documenting indicators that military historians recognize from previous conflicts. I'm not here to tell you Russia is collapsing. I'm here to show you what the Institute for the Study of War, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies are actually reporting, and let you compare those indicators to the patterns we've just examined. Pattern recognition, not prophecy. Let's start with manpower. The Institute for the Study of War assessed in December 2025 that Russia faces near exhaustion of voluntary recruitment expected in 2026. What does that mean in practical terms? Russia has been offering massive signing bonuses to avoid another mobilization. bonuses that reached over $30,000 in some regions by late 2024. But even with these incentives, recruitment is slowing. The demographic reality is brutal. Russia's working-age male population has been declining since the Soviet collapse. Every casualty is harder to replace. The Center for Strategic and International Studies projects Russia will likely hit 1 million total casualties by summer 2025. Let me put that number in context. Russia has suffered approximately 5 times as many fatalities in 3 years in Ukraine as in all Soviet and Russian wars combined in the 77 years after World War II. Afghanistan, Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, everything doesn't add up to the bleeding happening right now. The exact casualty numbers vary by source because this is an active conflict and both sides manipulate data. Mediazona, an independent Russian outlet, has confirmed over 85,000 deaths through obituaries and public records. That's verified, meaning the real number is certainly higher. ISW, citing leaked Russian data from October 2025, reported 86,744 killed just from January to August 2025 alone. Medusa's analysis suggests 200,000 to 220,000 killed by mid-2025. These aren't Ukrainian propaganda figures. These are estimates from Western defense institutions and Russian independent journalists. The casualties are real, sustained, and accelerating. Now, let's talk equipment. The International Institute for Strategic Studies published an assessment in February 2025, stating that Russia will not have sufficient main battle tanks to conduct effective offensive operations beyond early 2026. If it maintains 2024's operational tempo and losses. Russia lost approximately 1,400 main battle tanks in 2024 alone. Total tank losses since February 2022 exceed 4,000 confirmed. Russia started the war with roughly 3,500 active tanks and access to 10,000 to 12,000 inches Soviet-era storage. Satellite imagery analysis of those storage facilities shows that only 41 to 52% of pre-war reserves remain. T-80B stocks, a relatively modern tank, are down 79%. Russia is pulling T-55 seconds out of storage. Tanks designed in the 1,940 seconds, because the reserve is running dry. Remember Germany in 1945 calling up the Volkssturm with World War I rifles? Russia in 2025 is fielding tanks from when Stalin was alive. Territorial gains tell an even starker story. In 2024, Russia gained approximately 4,168 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. That's 0.69% of Ukraine, less than 1%. The cost for that gain? Hundreds of thousands of casualties and thousands of tanks. The advance rates near Kharkiv have slowed to only 50 meters per day. Let me put that in perspective. During World War I, the Battle of the Somme, one of the bloodiest and most futile offensives in history, achieved an advance rate of 80 meters per day. Russia, in 2025, is advancing slower than the Somme. Think about what that means. Industrial warfare, in 2025, with drones and precision artillery, is producing advance rates worse than trench warfare in 1916. Here's the timeline that matters. In March 2022, at Russia's peak territorial control, they held approximately 22% of Ukraine. Then, Ukraine counterattacked. Between April and November 2022, Ukraine recaptured roughly 50,000 square kilometers during the Kyiv withdrawal, the Kharkiv offensive, and the Kherson offensive. Russia currently controls approximately 19 to 20% of Ukraine, essentially the same as late 2022. 2 years of fighting, hundreds of thousands of casualties, minimal net change in territorial control. This is attritional exhaustion. This is Verdun. The economic indicators are equally concerning. Russia's central bank interest rate hit 21% in February 2025, a 25-year high. That's not normal. That's a central bank desperately trying to control inflation caused by massive military spending. Military expenditure is consuming 6 to 8% of GDP versus 3.6% before the war. The defense industry is experiencing what Defense Magazine called its deepest crisis since the USSR collapse, with severe labor and component shortages. Russia is trading long-term economic health for short-term military capability, just like Diocletian's reforms that saved Rome while draining its reserves. Now, here's where the pattern recognition gets uncomfortable. Remember the indicators we identified? Let me check them off. Military overextension. Russia is fighting a full-scale conventional war while maintaining forces in Syria, Africa, and garrison commitments across 11 time zones. Check. Catastrophic defeats that break offensive capability. The 2022 Kharkiv and Kherson retreats, where Russia lost 50,000 square kilometers in 2 months. Check. Desperate mobilization, depleting reserves. The September 2022 partial mobilization of 300,000. Recruitment of prisoners. Reports of North Korean troops supplementing Russian forces. Check. Declining quality of replacements. Multiple reports of minimal training. Soldiers complaining of weeks instead of months of preparation. Older equipment being fielded. Check. Economic strain. 21% interest rates. 6 to 8% of GDP on military spending. Check. What's missing from the pattern? 2 things. The failed last gamble offensive and the internal collapse. Russia hasn't launched its Kaiserschlacht yet, but here's what makes analysts nervous. If the pattern holds, a desperate offensive designed to achieve a breakthrough before reserves are completely exhausted would be the logical next move. An attempt to force negotiations from a position of strength before the manpower and equipment situation becomes untenable. History suggests such offensives rarely work. The 1918 Spring Offensive gained 40 miles, cost 300,000 casualties, and Germany surrendered 7 months later. The 1944 Battle of the Bulge advanced 50 miles, cost 100,000 casualties, and Germany collapsed within 4 months. I want to be crystal clear. Russia in 2025 is not Germany in 1918 or 1945. Different political systems, different geography, different international contexts. Russia has nuclear weapons, which changes every calculation. Russia's economy, while strained, hasn't collapsed. Putin's political control remains strong. These are not minor differences. But the military indicators, the observable patterns in casualty rates, equipment losses, territorial stalemate, and economic strain, those match historical patterns that preceded rapid military collapse in previous conflicts. Multiple defense analysts are projecting potential Russian difficulties by 2026. Not defeat, not collapse, difficulties. Inability to sustain offensive operations at current intensity. Potential need for another mobilization. Exhaustion of Soviet-era equipment reserves. These projections aren't based on hope or propaganda. They're based on math. Production capacity minus loss rates equals time until reserves are depleted. The math is unforgiving. The uncomfortable truth is this. Every military in history that exhibited these indicators subsequently experienced rapid operational decline. Not always total defeat. Sometimes negotiated settlements. Sometimes frozen conflicts. But in every case, the ability to conduct sustained offensive operations ended. The pattern has been consistent for 2,000 years. Which brings us to the final question. If the pattern is real, if these indicators actually predict operational exhaustion, what should we expect to see next? And more importantly, how do we recognize the difference between temporary setbacks and the beginning of irreversible collapse? That's what we need to understand in the conclusion. So what is the pattern? It's not a formal 8-stage academic model. No peer-reviewed historian has published that framework. But across 2,000 years of military history, 6 recurring indicators appear in sequence before major military collapses. Let me list them clearly. 1. Military overextension beyond sustainable logistics. Fighting on too many fronts. Supply lines stretched to breaking. Garrison requirements depleting field army strength. 2. catastrophic defeat that permanently breaks offensive capability. Adrianople for Rome, Berezina for Napoleon, Amiens for Germany in 1918, Stalingrad for Germany in 1943. The battle where initiative is lost forever. 3. Desperate mobilization that depletes last reserves. Diocletian's reforms, Napoleon's Marie-Louises, Germany's 1918 expansion. The Volkssturm, measures that look like strength but accelerate exhaustion. 4. Declining quality of replacements, foreign foederati, teenage conscripts, minimal training, obsolete equipment. The gap between what you need and what you have keeps widening. 5. The failed last gamble offensive, Kaiserschlacht, Battle of the Bulge. The desperate attack designed to change strategic reality that instead exhausts remaining strength without achieving objectives. 6. Internal collapse, mutinies, mass surrenders, political revolution. The army stops fighting not because it's defeated, but because it's lost the will to continue. These 6 indicators have appeared before every major military collapse in recorded history, not as prophecy, as pattern. And the pattern accelerates with modern warfare. Rome took 250 years, Napoleon took 36 months. Germany in World War I took 10 months from the spring offensive to surrender. Germany in World War II took 10 months from the Battle of the Bulge to Berlin falling. Here's why empires don't see it coming. They're inside the pattern, making rational decisions with incomplete information. Emperor Valens at Adrianople thought he was fighting one battle, not watching Rome's military end. Napoleon after Berezina thought he could rebuild and win in 1813. German generals in spring 1918 believed the Kaiserschlacht was working right up until their army started surrendering en masse. From the inside, every decision makes sense. It's only in retrospect that the pattern becomes obvious. By the time everyone agrees the collapse is happening, it's already over. You're just watching the final act. The historian's advantage is simple. We see the full arc. They lived day by day, crisis by crisis, battle by battle. They couldn't see that they'd crossed the point of no return until it was years behind them. Which brings us back to that opening scene. August 9, 378 AD. Emperor Valens watching his army form up outside Adrianople. He doesn't know this is Rome's Stalingrad. He doesn't know that by sunset, the greatest military power on earth will have permanently lost the ability to go on offense. To him, it's just another battle against another barbarian tribe. That's how it always feels from the inside. Normal, manageable, temporary. The pattern doesn't announce itself with trumpets and declarations. It reveals itself through indicators that only become clear when you study what came before. And the uncomfortable truth about Russia in 2025 is that multiple credible defense institutions are documenting indicators that historians recognize. Not all 6. Not yet, but enough to notice, enough to ask questions, enough to understand that if the pattern continues, we'll know what comes next, because we've seen it before. The pattern has been right for 2,000 years. It predicted Rome, Napoleon, Germany twice, not because history repeats exactly, but because the fundamental realities of logistics, manpower, morale, and economics don't change. Armies that bleed faster than they can replace, that exhaust reserves on failed offensives, that depend on increasingly poor quality replacements, they all end up in the same place eventually. The timeline might vary, the details might differ, but the destination is consistent. If you found this analysis compelling, if understanding these patterns changed how you see current events, you need to watch my next video on related topic. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And please, comment below with your thoughts. Are these patterns legitimate, historical tools, or am I seeing connections that aren't there? I want to hear your perspective, because one way or another, we're watching history unfold in real time. And understanding the patterns might be the most important thing we learn this year.